LiberalViewer present.
So President Barack Obama's announcement last week that he'd fulfill his campaign pledge to send more American troops to Afghanistan caused some strange reactions, perhaps strangest of all on Fox News, where, despite Democrats having argued for years that troop levels in Iraq have taken attention away from al-Qaeda's actual base in Afghanistan, Fox News contributor Michelle Malkin somehow managed to find a Democrat double standard in continuing to approach Iraq and Afghanistan differently, as you can see here.
I think that this is as stark an example of Democrat double standards that you're going to get. And it's great to remind people of recent history and what happened in the prelude up to the Iraq war surge. You had people like, Joe Biden grandstanding on the Senate floor and passing resolutions as part of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in heated opposition to any kind of surge tactics. And he pounded his fists and said that this was the absolute wrong way to go. You had thousands of people taking to the streets, Answer, Code Pink, accusing the Bush administration of sending our troops into their deaths and murder. And now here essentially you have the continuation of surge policies and not a peep from these anti-war people.
Of course, saying there's not a peep from any anti-war people is not exactly accurate, given that there's still an anti-war left, and, as exemplified by progressive Democratic Congresswoman Maxine Waters' exchange with HBO's Bill Maher last Friday, they still show the concern with troop increases that you can see here.
Obama sending 17,000 troops to Afghanistan, you know, is it really going to make a difference? Are we really going to pull that one out? They play soccer with human heads. I don't know if they're, it's bad to say they're not ready for freedom or that, but you know what? Maybe they're not. Maybe they're not ready.
Well, the Progressive Caucus will be putting out something very soon to try and engage the president about sending the troops to Afghanistan. We don't want to substitute Afghanistan for Iraq.
But it's not a question of substituting Afghanistan for Iraq. It's removing Iraq as a distraction from fixing our failure to give the people of Afghanistan a working government after decades of fighting our wars for us. And you can't separate this failure in Afghanistan from our preoccupation with Iraq and George W. Bush's surge policy there, as Barack Obama explained himself in his debate with John McCain last September in this clip.
We cannot separate Afghanistan from Iraq, because what our commanders have said is we don't have the troops right now to deal with Afghanistan. So I would send 2 to 3 additional brigades to Afghanistan. Now keep in mind that we have 4 times the number of troops in Iraq, where nobody had anything to do with 9/11 before we went in, where in fact there was no al-Qaeda before we went in. But we have 4 times more troops there than we do in Afghanistan. And that is a strategic mistake, because every intelligence agency will acknowledge that al-Qaeda is the greatest threat against the United States, and that Secretary of Defense Gates acknowledged the Central Front, that the place where we have to deal with these folks is going to be in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. So here's what we have to do comprehensively, though. It's not just more troops. We have to press the Afghan government to make certain that they are actually working for their people.
And making sure the government of Afghanistan is working for its people is even more important than the increase in troop levels, because that's where the United States has failed Afghanistan, rather than Afghanistan just not being ready for freedom, as Bill Maher claimed in that previous clip. That's because just having elections in Afghanistan doesn't shift all the blame for the country's failures to the Afghan people, particularly when the U.S. military often short-circuited that democracy and installed thieving thug warlords not accountable to the people, as journalist-turned-humanitarian activist Sarah Chase explained in a radio interview on NPR this month here.
First of all, we were the ones who basically brought President Karzai to the fore. So when he was elected, it was 2 years after he had already been in power. But part of why he was popular is because we were backing him, and the Afghans trusted us to bring them a properly functioning, responsive state, right? And then what they say, and this is what's really accurate, is we actually imposed a lot of these warlord governors who have become the problem. And I watched this happen in Kandahar, where President Karzai actually appointed somebody else to be governor of Kandahar, and we brought a different person in and imposed him, and we imposed him by force of arms. And I saw us doing this time and time again. We were using these warlords as our proxies in the fight against al-Qaeda. And we put them in positions of political power, and then we never, ever paid any attention to how they treated their population, to the point where I saw the guy that we imposed as governor of Kandahar, he had his own private militia. And that private militia was wearing U.S. Army fatigues, and they were abusing the population from the get-go. They were stealing stuff from people, they were kidnapping people, they were beating people up, they were doing whatever they wanted, and we never disciplined them in any way. And so the Afghans' answer to your point is, you know what? These are your dogs. You brought them here. It's up to you to bring them to heel. And once you bring them to heel a little bit so that they're not such a danger to us, then we, the Afghan population, can reassert our own control. But right now, the deck is too heavily stacked against us for us to be able to retake control of this situation.
Now, that assessment sounds almost hopeful, as if given enough security and a more accountable government, Afghanistan could actually end up as a functioning democracy, but I'm not so sure, so I want to know what you think. What, if anything, can the Obama administration do to clean up the mess in Afghanistan left by the failed foreign policy of George W. Bush? And as a way to understand why some in Afghanistan are actually turning to the Taliban, if you were given the same choice that U.S. forces gave many of the Afghan people, who would you choose to follow? Conservative clerics or thieving thugs?
I YouTube, you decide.